Welcome to another edition of Trojan Stock on Tap. It's been a few weeks, but I'm glad to have you all here this evening. We got a very special guest. You may recognize our guest, Mr. Tony Altimore. Tony Altimore, for those of you who don't know, is the host of USC Postgame Live on Mark Rogers, the voice of college football. Been excited to be a co-host with Tony Altimore for the past 2 years. Tony's also the co-host of the Pac-12 Chat Show Live, which I think is now done and buried. But Tony, welcome to the show.
We have to do a finale.
We have to do a finale.
We have to do a finale.
Welcome to the show. Whenever there is things happening in college football on a national perspective that are going to affect college football, specifically USC, none other than bringing on Tony Altimore, who's a strategic marketing management consultant. He's very familiar with the university landscape. Tony, thank you to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
So crazy day yesterday.
Huge day.
Actually, for the past week and a half, a lot of different forces have been shaping the future of college football. And the latest one yesterday, which happened with the National
Labor Relations Board,
ruled that Dartmouth basketball players are employees of the school. So what does that mean? That's why we have you on the show, Tony. Tell us what, in a nutshell, what's happening with this. Was kind of like random. Dartmouth basketball are employees, but that's the first that we've kind of heard that. What's happening there, Tony?
So really interesting thing. The NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, a district or regional manager in Boston, declared that the Dartmouth men's basketball team are treated as employees by Dartmouth College, and therefore Dartmouth College has to give them the right to unionize. So what happened, and this is actually the same thing happened about 10 years ago with Northwestern. It's actually just listen to Steve Berkowitz from USA Today talk about this. He's the master. But one of the interesting things, if you guys remember back, did happen about 10 years ago with Northwestern. Now, what getting back to Dartmouth, and we'll talk about Northwestern in a sec. This is an interesting situation because what happened was their men's basketball team, working with SEIU, the huge union, filed a request to have themselves declared employees and have the right to unionize. And Dartmouth, of course, said no. So this goes to a trial, a hearing with the National Labor Relations Board, and they went through. And the big issue now, again, remember, Dartmouth men's basketball, they don't make any money, right? They don't even get scholarships. It's technically a non-scholarship sport. But under the definition of what is an employee, and a lot of you guys who've dealt with anything in HR, dealt with contractors, whatever, there's rules about, like, if you do this, you're an employee. If you tell someone what time they have to be everywhere all day long, what time they have to eat, and you provide them food and what they're going to wear, and you restrict what they can wear, that's called a uniform. That this is work. The more restrictions you put on somebody, under our law, you don't have to like it, but under our law, they become an employee and therefore have the right to compensation and unionization and other things. So, this has gone there. They ruled against them and they lost. Now, there's a couple interesting things about this. One of them is the NLRB only applies to private organizations. So, it doesn't apply to public schools, for example. The other thing about it is Dartmouth, of course, will appeal. And that will then go to the full, the five, however many members there are, the full national NLRB, who will have to review that. If the full NLRB agrees with that, then Dartmouth can appeal again to the federal appellate court, which, you're talking about this could go on for, 2, maybe 3 years of process here. And that's very similar to what happened, about a decade ago with Northwestern, where they also agreed, because remember, the reason that schools like Dartmouth, Northwestern, USC get targeted is because they're private schools and they're not religious. So you can't hide behind a weird, Supreme Court ruling that gives churches the ability to do something. You can't hide behind, public laws. So big elite private schools get targeted. So when what happened with Northwestern is they did that. They were going to give the football players the right to unionize, and they appealed it to the NLRB. And the NLRB, now this is 10 years ago. This is before the NCAA's record of just losing everything. This is back when the NCAA was still trying to ride high. They ruled that they found some kind of technicalities in the ruling and said, well, because it would apply to this, it would apply to public school. They kind of wheedled their way out and overturned it. So that may happen again. Now, what's interesting is this is one of two cases going right now, and the other one is USC. So USC just humiliated itself doing the exact same exercise to a case in LA where USC, men's, women's basketball, and football were trying to have themselves declared employees. Again, this is encouraged by the activists. They're trying to get players' rights. And USC went and they knew they were going to, right? It's not USC didn't do anything wrong, but USC got to be the one to stand there and just say ridiculous things like, well, they don't have to come to weightlifting. What happens if they don't come? Well, they get in trouble. So they have to come. USC's like, oh, I don't know. And it was just, USC looked foolish in this hearing. Again, knew they were going to look foolish, right? Like, no way to not look foolish when you're defending the indefensible. But there's an interesting thing about the USC one. It's not just against USC. It's jointly against USC, the Pac-12, and the NCAA, arguing that USC athletes, because the Pac-12 is where the money comes in from the TV, and the NCAA is the overarching body. So the argument is that the NCAA and the Pac-12 and USC are jointly employers of the athletes. Now, this is big, because if this case goes through, and it's probably going to, because again, USC looked dumb in that interview. Again, not USC's fault, defending the indefensible. They looked bad. And so if that comes out, then that opens the floodgates, because that case may declare that the conferences and the NCAA are joint employers, and therefore public schools are not off the hook. Religious schools are not off the hook. And they're going to have to probably start to treat athletes as employers or as employees, which, actually take it back. They're going to have to either start treating them as the employees they functionally are, or they're going to have to stop treating them like employees. And they're going to have to pick, and they may have to pick on a case-by-case basis, depending on the sport. Oh, you're muted.
This is another domino with the USC case going on, along with Dartmouth. And there's a number of different events that have led to this. Ironically, this is the night before signing day for college football. And early signing day happened in December of 2017, just 7 short years ago. Who would have thunk that we would be talking about the National Labor Board and Dartmouth about athletes being employees?
Of all places.
Yeah, on National Signing Day Eve. But that's how much college football has changed, and it continues to change. As you know, the transfer portal started in 2018. You had the Alston case that happened in June of 2021, which was followed by NIL in July of 2021. You have conference realignment. You have a lot of different forces that are happening. Just last Friday, the Big Ten and the SEC kind of threw a shot at the NCAA, like, hey, we're going to go ahead and figure things out because we're the adults in the room. But
they're sick of losing.
Excuse me?
They're sick of losing. I mean, remember,
exactly.
If you just go back, remember Jeremy Bloom back in the day? If they had just let Jeremy Bloom have his modeling money, and then let Ed O'Bannon have his video game money,
right,
we wouldn't be here today. So all of this was manageable. And now this is on the verge of costing them billions.
Billions. And speaking of billions, there's another case going on right now, Tony, about, and why don't you refresh my mind as well as the audience mind about that case that's going on? That is another front that the NCAA has to
lose huge on.
Exactly. Go ahead.
So that's the House case. And the reason it's called House, it's House versus NCAA. It's named after Grant House, the swimmer from Arizona State, but it's actually like 3 cases combined into one. So, just like a lot of those, huge famous cases, they get consolidated into one. Grant House gets to be the front guy on this one, even though there's a number of these cases. And what they have sued the NCAA for is they said from a period, period X to Y, you were an illegal cartel who refused to allow us to earn our NIL earnings. You prevented us from that. You illegally, antitrust law, super straightforward. NCAA absolutely breaks it. They have admitted they break it. I mean, in their begging Congress for help, they've admitted that they break the antitrust laws. So there's no question they break it. They've also been found repeatedly in all kinds of courts guilty of breaking the antitrust laws. So you have broken antitrust law to prevent us from having earned all this money for these years. Now pay up. And that case was just granted class action status. It's in with the senior judge for the Ninth Circuit of which is based out of Oakland. She's in Oakland, and that's Judge Wilkin. She's a Cal and Stanford alum, and she is former Cal law professor. And Judge Wilkin is actually the judge who presided over the O'Bannon case, where she shredded them for antitrust behavior. So, she's well familiar with their antitrust behavior. And they're probably going to get nailed again. Now, because this is class action status, if they don't settle it, it's triple damages or whatever. Talk to your lawyers about the class action different. But basically, they're on the verge of, if they don't settle this, they could be liable for up to $4 billion. And this is against the conferences and the NCAA. So this is one of the whole issues about, like, as the Pac-12 is breaking up, like, who has responsibility for the bill that's going to come from this? So they're going to have to settle it. And again, the NCAA has been saying, we want antitrust protection. Because if they could get Congress to just pass a law that says, you don't have to, you can mistreat people, you can abuse employees, you're exempted from antitrust, then they won't have to pay any of it. But the problem is that Congress on the left says, sorry, what do you want us to do to workers' rights? And Congress on the right says, what does elite higher education want? And the result is they're not getting anything. Now, supposedly, some people from Congress have said they will work with the NCAA if the NCAA can get to some solution on its own other than begging for permission to break the law. I'm doubtful on that because Congress can't do anything right now. So they're definitely not going to save these people.
No. And if you're just joining us, we are pleased to have on the show Tony Altimore, strategic marketing management consultant. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you need to. I always get enlightened in the morning with my first cup of coffee. I follow Tony on Twitter, and usually by 6 a.m. Pacific time, Tony's got a tweet out that educates you on what's happening at the university level with college football, with athletics. He's spot on with all the different conferences, and it might be about attendance. It might be about admission rates.
We never know. Something new every day.
You get smarter every day with your cup of Joe with Tony Altimore. Pleased to have him on talking about college football and the latest ruling that Dartmouth basketball players are employees. Tony, I got to ask you a question as we get into this. If you've seen the thumbnail, basically, I'll flash it up here real quick. You got to go ahead, and there's a keg on the thumbnail, Tony, and you have to explain the legend of Dartmouth's Mr. Keggy.
I love Keggy.
Yes.
Keggy is a legend. So Dartmouth's mascot, it is a keg. It's a keg named Keggy. So when one of the problems was that, as the 60s turned into the 70s, and schools whose mascots were the Indians realized that that was not really okay to be anymore. They had to change it really quick. And one of the easiest ways was to name yourself a color and give yourself a ridiculous mascot. So the Stanford Indians became the Cardinal, and they got a dancing tree. And the Dartmouth Indians became the Big Green, and they got a dancing keg. And Keggy is pretty classic. He's a beloved figure among Ivy League mascots.
Yep, the transition from the 60s to the 70s, for those that maybe were kids of the 70s, such as myself, you may have watched some cool cartoons like HR Puff and Stuff in Lidsville. Mr. Keggy looks like he's directly out of one of those Sid and Marty Krofft cartoons.
He's great. He's perfect for the king of the craft beer channels right here.
There you go. So, hey, to Mr. Keggy.
To Mr. Keggy.
It's a lot better than the Stanford Indian or the Stanford Cardinal. So, Mr. Keggy in Dartmouth, who would have known that? See, that's the thing that you get on the channel here on Trojans Talk on Tap. It's college football. It's beer.
Stanford had originally at one point tried taking their like tough Indian and made it like an emasculated cartoon. And in typical Stanford way, they just made it so much worse.
Yeah.
And then the Indian went away.
So, Tony, what are the next steps, would you say? What do you think is going to happen now that, okay, the Labor Relations Board has ruled that Dartmouth, the basketball players are employees. It's going to get appealed.
That'll probably take a year.
Yeah. Is this the crack that a lot of people are looking at, where, yes, it's with private universities, but is the next domino
the next
traction?
Yeah, I think the next domino is the USC case.
Okay.
And the case is, does USC lose? Because if USC loses, remember, that's the one that has joint status.
Okay.
So
that's
it's got joint
to the conferences and to the NCAA.
Yeah. Now, by the way, to a lot of people who are like, who are mad at this is actually the way that you fix things. So a lot of you guys are upset about, but fans in general are upset about things like the transfer portal, unlimited this, people can do anything. It's going crazy. The way that you fix that, there's a couple ways, but we're giving you the 99% answer, right? Like there's some angry labor lawyer is going to be typing in the keyboard warrior in the comments, but the way that you fix that is with collective bargaining.
Yeah.
So people have rights, and the Supreme Court was very, very clear to the NCAA that students and athletes have rights, and the NCAA can't just like make rules to get rid of them because it feels like it. Again, some nuance to this, but in general, the only way to get people to give up their rights is to get them to agree to give up their rights. And you do that with collective bargaining, right? Like the reason that baseball player, there's rules about baseball, you can't just change from the Mets to the Yankees tomorrow. Like there's rules on this, there's contracts. That's all part of the collective bargaining agreement. So the way that you solve this is with collective bargaining.
It's fascinating what's going on. And for those of you who are just joining us, we've got Tony Altimore with us talking college football, the news that's affecting college football and the future of college football. And if you were watching last year on the Voice of College Football, Tony was a guest on Mark Rogers' show and had a lot of information with respect to conference realignment, specifically all the dealings that were going on with the Pac-12 as it was trying to get a deal done. And Tony was
we'll have to do a show. We have some new details on that too. Some new details have emerged.
Yeah. So it was great following Tony last year. If you're not following on Twitter, you need to. And this year, last year seemed big. This year is just huge. In the last week, we had the chancellor of the University of Tennessee blasting the NCAA. We had a lawsuit filed the next day on behalf of the attorney generals of the state of Tennessee and Virginia. On Friday, we had the SEC and the Big Ten basically stating to the NCAA that we are going to go ahead and take a look at some best practices, and we're going to go ahead and see if we can make some recommendations on how college football should proceed. Am I stating that correct, Tony?
Yeah, so we actually just got another development tonight on the Tennessee
Okay.
case.
Okay.
And that is that. So they had Tennessee. So now, bear in mind, guys, Tennessee has a little bit of vested interest in this. Okay, like so, love Tennessee, love Dante Plowman, love Josh Heupel, love Danny White, love everything they're doing. But Tennessee is on probation for that. It seems like such a lifetime ago, but it really wasn't. For giving McDonald's bags of cash to their recruits.
Oh, yes. The McDonald's
Yeah.
bags.
You forgot the McDonald's bags. Well, that came with a couple years of probation. And with probation, if you get caught cheating while on probation, you get slammed. So the problem with Tennessee is that they've been caught NIL cheating. And so they have, their best option here is to attack the rule and get rid of the rule, because they're terrified of what's going to happen if they get this is not Tennessee. Let's just be clear, guys. This is not Tennessee trying to solve the problems of the world because they feel like it. This is Tennessee is terrified of what's going to happen if they get nailed again while on probation. Just like if you break the rules and you're put on probation and your probation officer finds out you're doing something shady again. So Tennessee's motives are not pure, but the Tennessee Attorney General and the Virginia Attorney General have gone after the NCAA. And tonight, now they asked for a temporary restraining order that would just remove all the rules in NIL. And the court said, okay, that's a bit much, because in order to get a temporary restraining order, you have to have irreparable harm and urgency. And they're like, you don't have that, Tennessee. But the court actually said in turning down the temporary restraining order, but it does definitely appear that Tennessee will prevail on the merits. So they basically said, in the end, there's no question again, right? Like, guys, Charlie Baker, the president of the NCAA, was in Washington, D.C. the other day talking about how they have to have an antitrust exemption because they violate antitrust laws. So there's no debate as to whether they violate the antitrust laws. They do, and they always have. It's just finally catching up with them.
Fascinating. We've got that front going on with the University of Tennessee and in Virginia, and then you have what's happening with, I guess, the Power Two, with the Big Ten and the SEC, and you can see all these different forces are changing college football, and that's why we're here tonight with Tony Altimore. Tony, appreciate you having you in tonight. I know we're getting close to moving on, and we're going to have you on another time because there's so many different things going on. I appreciate coming on because we've been trying to get together for a week, and it seems like every other day something new is happening that
changes everything.
Yeah, and it is funny because we've talked numerous times offline, and I want to bring this back. You brought up a great point on one of your tweets. I think you reposted it. It was John Wilner from the San Jose Mercury News on the day of the Pac-12 championship back, I think it was December 2nd. He kind of had a piece that was fast forwarding what was happening with all these changes in NCAA and college football. And he kind of projected to the mid 2030s. Tony, why don't you just touch upon that real quick about that article, highlight some of the points of that article and how it's funny. John Wilner is
he's so good.
He might be. He foreshadowed things like 9 weeks ago. Tony, touch upon that.
Yeah. So John Wilner wrote a really kind of a fun, almost like a futuristic alternate history. He envisioned Utah as the 2035 Pac-12 champions. And he was like, how did we get here? And so he looked at what he sort of sees as the future and sort of kind of wrote some fun alternate histories of ways that we could get there. And one of the things that he really thinks is that the Big Ten and the SEC will take football and very much do their own thing. And that will cause a shakeout of Olympic sports that will sort of re-regionalize. And he sort of sees most of the old Pac-12, except for USC, Oregon, and Washington, I think, the rest of the bunch kind of coming back together again at some point in the future. and talks about how he does that. Funny enough, he also envisions Jen Cohen as the next commissioner of the Big Ten, which I could see.
Yeah.
She's great. But it was, it was a kind of tongue in cheek, but also really interesting, because one of the things that you'll hear stuff a lot where people say, "Oh, this is going to happen," and it's hard to actually sort of see, how do we get to there from here? And what John's piece really did, very interestingly, was chart out like examples of how you can get from there to here.
Yeah, and it's anybody's guess what's going to happen right now, but you're starting to see all of these different elements shaping up to change college football, what it used to be. And what is definite and what is clear is the NCAA has never been an organization with leadership. They've always been a punitive type of organization, a rule keeper, if you will, and archaic rules that were just
Illegal.
Illegal, exactly. And and the Supreme Court ruled that 9-0 in the Alston case.
And ruled that previously in 1984 with the Oklahoma Regions case.
There you go.
Like, the thing is they break the law, they break the antitrust law, so they can't win at the end of the day. All they can do is try to like bludgeon you with legal nonsense until you give up. But now that they've been losing, and that's what they did to Jeremy Bloom. They told Colorado, you put Jeremy Bloom on the field and we'll forfeit your games. Well, now they can't do that because they keep losing, and so the courts are just smacking them around. I mean, they're just like a tennis ball being smacked back and forth.
I'm glad you brought up that 1984 Oklahoma case. Tony, fill our audience in what that was about briefly. It had to do with televised games, correct?
Yeah, so the NCAA had control of the television rights, and they decided, who was on and who got what money, and they said, no, you can't do this. It's antitrust. You don't have the right to like force us to let you control our games and control our money. So the Oklahoma region sued. Now, the crazy thing is this was not a new concept. They picked up the University of Pennsylvania, the Penn Quakers, founders of the Ivy League, filed the exact same lawsuit in 1951, I think, against the NCAA. When the NCAA took control of TV rights. Remember, Philly was like one of the biggest cities in the country, still is, but even bigger then, one of the biggest cities in the country. Penn was one of the most glamorous teams on the East Coast, believe it or not. Until Michigan expanded the Big House, Penn's Franklin Field, first stadium with double-decker stadium, first stadium with radio broadcast, first stadium with a regular TV broadcast. It was bigger until they expanded the Big House. It was the biggest stadium in the country, Franklin Field. They had 85,000 people every game. Their stadium was so glamorous and huge that they were playing like 10 home games a year because everyone wanted to come to them, including Notre Dame, because you could make more money if you played at Penn. They had their own TV contract to put themselves on ABC. So when the NCAA tried to seize this, Penn sued. And it said antitrust is absolutely illegal. You cannot do this. Now, what happened in 1951 is then Penn sort of got coerced by the rest of the Ivy League to give up their lawsuit, and then they actually formed the Ivy League as an actual conference. And so Penn walked away from the lawsuit. 30 years later, Oklahoma picks up the lawsuit, files it with their name on it, and says, they rewrote it, but close enough, and says, this is illegal. We want the rights to our own TV again. And again, went to Supreme Court, and of course, the NCAA lost because they're violating antitrust laws, and they always have been.
And the reason I bring that up is that was 40 years ago, and that was a seminal moment because TV was involved. You look at who has control right now of college football, it's the television networks. It's Fox, CBS, NBC, ABC, ESPN. And so that is, a lot of people believe they're the ones who are manipulating conference realignment with brands, televised product inventory, whatever you want to call it. And they have more power than the NCAA. The NCAA is on their back foot and they're retreating. And with this case with the NLRB, why it's so important is because it's been happening. You mentioned with Northwestern. Now you have with Dartmouth. You've got USC pending with the Pac-12, the NCAA attached to it. a lot of people believe that there's going to be collective bargaining agreement, there's going to be unionization, and that the athletes are going to have at least a chance at some type of revenue sharing with all this TV money that is coming about as we move into the 12-team playoff. And there's going to be a lot more money on the table. So we're going to get into that and a lot more on future episodes. Tony, we're going to have you back because there's so much happening in college football. And I know you've been busy, and it's great to have you on.
Great to be here.
Would you like to come back on? We gotta have a date.
I would be honored. Let's do it later this week. We'll do it early next week. Either way.
Yeah, because we've got to talk about what happened last Friday with the SEC in the Big Ten. Because if you look at it, they are supported by the television networks. They are the adults in the room. If you remember, with the conference realignment with the Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, Greg Sankey organized that. He actually backstabbed the Big 12 commissioner in the back as they were coming up with the new college football playoff. I think his name was Bob Bowlesby, but they were working on that along with Jack Swarbrick. And what happened? You had the Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC. You obviously had SC and UCLA going to the Big Ten initially, followed later by, as we know, Oregon and Washington. But when Sankey's involved, and now you have Petiti with the Big Ten, they are going to dictate, in my opinion, they're going to dictate what the NCAA is going to do. And everybody wants to know about a breakaway or what's going to happen with college football. And we got to get into that in the discussion. So, Tony, I look forward to having you on again, and we can get into that. It'll
be fun.
We're going to leave it with this, but give me your thoughts as we close the show here tonight. I appreciate you having you on. But what do you think happens next, or why not? Why is it, what's going to happen next with this Dartmouth ruling, and how important is this in the scheme of things?
I think it's enormous because it's another, you think about, pulling out Jenga blocks, like the thing is rocking, and this is just another one of those blocks yanked out of the bottom. The USC one will be even bigger.
Okay.
But it's telegraphing already that the gig is up.
Yep. Well, we're going to stay tuned on that. Appreciate having you on, Tony, and we'll catch you on another episode. And if you're not following Tony on Twitter, that would be a good follow. Tony, appreciate you, and fight on, buddy.
Always fight on, LBC. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.